Indicted but defiant. Ex-Bosnian-Serb wartime leader Radovan Karadzic claims the war in the Balkans was just as his trial resumes in The Hague. Is this trial politically motivated? And could so-called international justice strengthen the notion of accountability worldwide? This is Inside Story. Welcome to the program. I'm Imran Garda. He's been called a hero by some and a butcher by others. The trial of former Bosnian-Serb leader Radovan Karadzic has resumed in The Hague, starting with his defense. Well, he's accused of war crimes committed during the Bosnian War in the early 1990s. The conflict lasted from 1992 to 1995 and spelled the end to the collection of republics known as Yugoslavia. The violence between Croatia, Bosnia-Herzegovina and Serbia left around 100,000 dead or missing and over 1 million people displaced. Karadzic stands accused of ordering the ethnic cleansing of Bosnian Muslims. He's defended his role in the perceived crimes against humanity.
I don't want to defend myself by saying that I wasn't important or that I didn't occupy important posts while I was serving my people, nor will I shift the blame to someone else. I will defend that nation of ours and their cause, which is just and holy. In that way, I shall be able to defend myself too, and my nation.
Well, Karadzic went on to reject any Serb responsibility in what happened to Muslims.
What's an even greater crime is to convince Muslims that this is what the Serbs did to them. How can one hope for reconciliation between the Serbs and the Muslims if the Muslims are to believe that the Serbs did this to them? We are going to prove that the Serbs never did this to the Muslims. We are going to prove to this courtroom that the Serbs never did this.
Well, let's try and understand him a bit more. Radovan Karadzic has been one of the most wanted men in the world, accused of being responsible for the worst atrocities during the Bosnian War. He's facing the most serious charges of war crimes since World War II. Karadzic faces 11 counts of genocide, extermination, persecution, murder, forced deportation. Under his command, he had threatened months before the war that 300,000 Muslims would die, and he predicted it being a, quote, bloodbath. Karadzic's forces allegedly massacred at least 8,000 Bosnian Muslim men and boys in Srebrenica in 1995. He spent over 11 years on the run, being so well protected by military loyal to him that he was reportedly able to see his wife regularly. Well, during his time in hiding, Karadzic worked as a New Age healer at a private clinic while using a false identity. He also managed to write poetry and novels that were published. Karadzic was discovered in Belgrade in July 2008 when he was finally arrested and handed over to the UN's International Criminal Tribunal. He had an interesting beard and hairstyle there as well. Well, let's discuss this now. Joining us today to discuss this further from The Hague, Andrew Cayley, the international prosecutor of the Khmer Rouge Tribunal. In Paris, Florence Hartman. She's the former spokesperson of the ICTY and author of the book Peace and Punishment: The Secret Wars of Politics and International Justice. And in London, Jeremy Corbyn. He's a member of the British Parliament. Thank you, all of you, for joining us. If I could start off with you, Ms. Hartman, do you think that justice will be served here?
Well, he was on the run. He has been arrested because there was an international tribunal which issued an arrest warrant. He wouldn't have been arrested or asked to explain what happened during the war. Then I think it is important. Now, we may not like the statement he made. That's the opening statement. But in the following weeks, we will have the presentation of the evidence. He's in denial, and the fact that we have a trial will enable people to present their story, the evidence, the victims to come and to tell what's the story. Otherwise, we would have just Karadzic saying, no, nothing happened.
Andrew Cayley at The Hague. Slobodan Milosevic held out, if you like, for want of a better term, until his own death. Many are saying that Karadzic is stalling. Do you think that he is stalling? And if so, are those stalling tactics working?
I don't think so. I mean, I think if you saw him this morning he was setting out his defence. He's certainly cooperating with the court at the moment. I think perhaps the defence that he's laid out is not a particularly effective one. If you heard him this morning, he was basically saying, I'm not going to talk about my responsibility, I'm going to talk about the responsibility of the Serb people for what happened. And the problem that he has with that is that many of the crimes which are part of the case that he is facing have already been proven to have been committed by Serb forces. For example, Srebrenica, which you've already mentioned. I was a prosecutor in that case, and it's absolutely clear that General Mladic and Serb forces were responsible for those crimes. So I think, in a sense, the manner of his defence is not a particularly effective one, but that's the route that he's chosen.
Jeremy Corbyn, as we broaden this out a little bit, there's an interesting quote from journalist Adam Lebor, who recently wrote, and I quote, "War criminal or statesman and peacemaker. It's all a question of timing, it seems." That's at the crux of all of this, isn't it, Mr. Corbyn?
Absolutely. I'm pleased that this trial is taking place, and we'll obviously see what comes out of it and what defence is put up. But I think the quote is actually a very thoughtful one, because there are many others around the world who one would either consider as peacemakers or war criminals, depending on your point of view. Henry Kissinger, for example, in the war in Cambodia, and many, many other military and political activities after that, such as the coup in Chile, could well be considered to be a war criminal. George Bush and Tony Blair for launching what is a war without an illegal basis in Iraq, for example. So I think if we are to have a system of international judicial proceedings against people that perpetrate violence, which I absolutely agree with and support, then we have to be even-handed about it.
Mr. Cayley, Jeremy Corbyn makes a great point there, doesn't he, about this international hypocrisy, the double standards. I mean, people will look to that example he gave of Henry Kissinger when he was giving that order from Nixon to attack Cambodia. The quote was to use anything that flies on anything that moves. I mean, if that wasn't one of the greatest calls for genocide in the modern age, what is? Why is Henry Kissinger a free man, whereas others have been pushed into The Hague and faced trial?
Look, I think we all accept that there are political limitations to these trials. In an ideal world, what Mr. Corbyn is saying would be the case, that everybody would be completely equal before the law. But let's face it, this system, this international system, has only been in operation really since the early 90s, the period after the Nuremberg trials in 1945 through to 1990. We didn't see any kinds of international trials for these sorts of crimes. So the reality is we do have to accept that there are limitations, that not everybody who perhaps should be brought before these courts will be, but that's not a reason why we shouldn't have these trials.
Let's go to Florence Hartman. Florence Hartman, this point that the system's not perfect, but it's working to a certain extent. I mean, is that a fair point? Because many would say the system is so self-limiting that you'll forever have a situation where the powerful nations, particularly those nations on the UN Security Council, will never have their leaders or generals at The Hague. Bottom line.
Well, no, that's not true. I don't agree with that. International justice is at the junction between politics and justice. That's why you have this kind of limitation. But the public opinion is very important in improving the system. For the moment, politics is so powerful that you have a selective justice, and some of the people are accountable for what they did, some other are not. But you have a pressure because there is the ICC, which is a permanent court, not only the one for the former Yugoslavia or Rwanda, which were created in '93 and '94. You have a permanent one. And you can make pressure, because if national judiciary is not bringing those people who committed crimes before their tribunals, then you can say, well, that's not fair. There is impunity for some people, there is no impunity for the others. And that's something which will improve. But if you want to help and assist international justice to be more independent from the political power, you shouldn't say, well, just it's not perfect, then we threw all the courts out. No, we have to pursue for international justice, because it's in the name of the victims, in the name of humanity. It's to protect each of us. And well, we can say now that we have a problem with some leaders of very strong and democratic countries. That's something you couldn't say earlier. We didn't bring them yet in trial, but you don't know what will happen. You never know if they won't be. There is a problem in the US today. There is a discussion. Earlier you wouldn't have any discussion. You have reports saying that there were war crimes.
Let me get Jeremy Corbyn to respond to that. The fact that there is a discussion, is that a significant development in our times?
Well, it's significant, but it's very slow and very late. If one thinks back over the history of world judicial systems since the end of the Second World War, we had the Nuremberg process, we had the Japanese process at the end of World War II. We then had an absolute silence for many decades until we had the special tribunals on Rwanda and on former Yugoslavia. Nothing was ever done about Algeria, nothing was done about Vietnam, and nothing was done about Cambodia or many, many other places. And so I make the point that, yes, I do support the trial, yes, I do support what the tribunal is trying to do, but also let's look at it in the context of those that also bombed Serbia, those that also planned for the whole breakup of Yugoslavia, which was at the heart of this particular conflict. But to go back to Florence's point concerning changes in the USA, of course it's good there is a discussion at long last, but hang on a minute, we had a, I believe, illegal war launched against Iraq by George W. Bush with the support of the British Prime Minister Blair. Are they going to appear in The Hague? I hope so, but are they likely to? I'm not so sure. This is the year when there's meant to be a review of the ICC and its processes, and it's time for there to be a public campaign in the USA for them to join the ICC, to make it a truly worldwide body. Otherwise, it looks like injustice for many people around the world, and that the permanent members of the Security Council simply escape all blame.
Andrew Cayley, we're never likely to see Bush or Blair in The Hague, are we?
Look, I mean, I doubt it. I doubt it. But let's look at the reality of this, and it's a point that Florence Hartman made. When the United Kingdom actually signed the Rome Statute, which established the International Criminal Court, at the time the invasion of Iraq was not exactly on the cards. So as soon as that actually took place, and as soon as war crimes had been detected, allegedly committed by British forces, criminal trials actually took place within the United Kingdom addressing those crimes. Now, there were no such investigations by the United Kingdom, perhaps no crimes took place, after the first Iraq conflict. So what I'm saying is there is a deterrent effect. I think the fact that the United Kingdom was fearful, or at least sensitive to the fact that the International Criminal Court might have become involved in investigations after the invasion of Iraq, was an impetus or a catalyst for the country to actually address those crimes itself. And there were a number of trials in the United Kingdom that took place addressing war crimes. So I do think that the International Criminal Court and international justice has had a deterrent effect. And after all, that is one of the purposes of a criminal justice system.
Jeremy Corbyn, Mr. Karadzic has made some interesting claims regarding US Ambassador Richard Holbrooke in his previous role. Karadzic spoke to our correspondent Ragi Omar from his cell recently, and he said, quote, Richard Holbrooke, acting on behalf of the international community, including the UN Security Council, promised that if I resigned my positions as president of Republika Srpska and the SDS party, did not participate in the upcoming elections and withdrew from public life, I would not be prosecuted in The Hague. Those are explosive claims of a deal. Isn't it fair that Richard Holbrooke takes the stand as a sort of witness or is cross-examined to clear this up?
Well, at the very least, Holbrooke should take the stand, because what we need to know is on whose authority he made those kind of offers. I suspect Holbrooke was falling into the American tradition of plea bargaining and essentially offering without any legal basis that he could get off scot-free if he reached agreement on certain arrangements, and that clearly he had no authority to make those, I suspect, and I think he should be brought to the stand. This investigation, this trial could be very, very interesting, because if Holbrooke is brought to the stand, then an awful lot of others might well be implicated in this, and what was the whole Western strategy in terms of dealing with Yugoslavia, or former Yugoslavia, and all the carnage that followed. And so I'm very interested in following this and seeing what happens there, and I think it needs to go wider, because I agree with what Florence was saying earlier, that we need to change the atmosphere worldwide. And if countries are then forced to be much more cautious because of the legal implications of what they're doing, leaders are frightened of being hauled before an international court, then we're beginning to make some progress. But we've got to start being far more serious, particularly about Iraq, and it's going to be very interesting to see how the Security Council deals with the Goldstone report and the implications that flow from that for the people of Gaza.
Okay, I mean, just crystallizing our focus again on this particular trial, Florence Hartman, that point about Richard Holbrooke, if Karadzic wants Holbrooke to take the stand, his team wants Holbrooke to take the stand, and if he doesn't, and the ICC doesn't allow it, it would be quite similar to Slobodan Milosevic wanting Bill Clinton to take the stand and him not doing so. Would that vindicate Karadzic and his supporters in many ways to say, you see, this is politically motivated, this is not about justice?
Well, no, don't mix up everything. I think that Holbrooke, because he was involved in the peace process, and he was present in the former Yugoslavia in '95, which is a clue year for the Karadzic trial. It's at the time of the genocide in Srebrenica, has to come as a witness. But there is the issue of Holbrooke as a U.S. or a country from the UN Security Council representative, offering after the war impunity to someone who has been indicted for crimes against humanity and genocide is an issue for us. Outside of the trial of Karadzic, who has to respond for his own crimes. But this issue is this famous dilemma which shouldn't exist between peace and justice. And it's what we are seeing now in Sudan, for instance. You need to have both. Maybe there is a problem of timing, but there is no choice between peace and justice. You have to do both because that's the only way to, on the long term. And we would like Holbrooke to explain what happened, but it doesn't change anything for the accountability of Karadzic ordering the ethnic cleansing, which is deportation, mass killings, and against targeted population. That's what we are expecting Karadzic to answer in The Hague. And we, as the public opinion, would like to have really an open discussion with Holbrooke or whoever was discussing impunity with those indicted for such serious crimes. And he is refusing. I have been asking him several times. He's getting mad. He doesn't like. And we need to know in order to have another approach in other crises. And we would like to know why there is also this dilemma again in relation to Sudan. Is al-Bashir accountable for the crimes alleged against him or not? Or do we do deals? Right. And if we do deals, then there is no deterrence.
That's a good point. Let's go to Andrew Cayley. I like the way this conversation expands and contracts. Mr. Cayley, the point about Sudan, the issue of justice and peace, and the fact that, for example, with Darfur, there seems to be major inroads in terms of political peace and a settlement there. Omar al-Bashir going to The Hague, if he ever does, would unravel all of that, wouldn't it? So in that sense, is international justice at a crossroads? Does it have a bit of an identity crisis?
Well, I think you have to look at the situation in Sudan in a very realistic fashion. You have to understand that, in essence, Sudan is not a signatory to the Rome Statute. That case was referred to the International Criminal Court by the Security Council. So actually enforcing the arrest warrant against Omar al-Bashir is something that is not likely to happen in the near future. You will also know that many African states are actually backing al-Bashir and are critical of the decision of the International Criminal Court. That said, it may well be that the decision by the International Criminal Court to issue an arrest warrant against Omar al-Bashir has pressurized the government in Khartoum to start talking seriously, or more seriously, to the rebels in Darfur. And I know recently we've seen one of the rebel movements has actually signed a peace agreement with the government. The issue, again, is what Florence Hartman said, it's one of timing. And it's absolutely true what you're saying. It's unlikely that we will see Omar al-Bashir in The Hague anytime soon, but certainly one of the beneficial effects of that arrest warrant has been to put pressure on a pretty intransigent government in Khartoum to do something about coming to peace arrangements with the rebel movements in Darfur.
Okay, Jeremy Corbyn, I'm going to allow you to flesh out your argument regarding the Goldstone report and Israel's war on Gaza, and of course you mentioned Iraq. In an ideal world, how would you like to see international justice being served with regards to those issues and others that are bothering you?
Firstly, that all countries sign up to the ICC and that there be full transparency in its proceedings and the pressures put on it. And I think the dangers with the Bashir prosecution, I'm not defending Bashir, by the way, but the dangers with it are that it creates a huge body of opinion, particularly in Africa, against the whole process of international justice. I think that is something one has to recognise, and maybe in the review this year that's an area for debate and discussion. Secondly, that the UN Security Council has to be reformed in some way. It simply cannot be right that the 5 permanent members of the Security Council can, generally speaking, manoeuvre things to protect themselves, either from severe criticism of human rights abuses or try, unsuccessfully in this case, but try as they did to get a second resolution which authorised the invasion of Iraq in 2003. But the test, I believe, is going to be on the world stage, the whole Goldstone issue. In Britain, we have universal jurisdiction on human rights abuses, and we have the right of arrest where there's prima facie evidence against any individual who is accused on human rights cases on an application to a court by a private citizen. An application was made for Tzipi Livni, the former Israeli foreign minister. That the arrest warrant was granted. She is not in Britain and not likely to be. That's a big debate that's happening. So I want to see universal jurisdiction, much more power for the International Criminal Court, and above all, no impunity for those that went into Iraq, such as particularly George W. Bush with the support of Tony Blair.
Okay, we'll let that be the final word.
About it. So we want to save lives, do it.
Okay, yeah, that's a fair point. I'll let that be the final word because we have run out of time. Mr. Cayley, Ms. Hartman and Mr. Corbyn, thank you very much, all of you, for sharing your thoughts with us. So much to say, so little time as always. And thank you so much, the viewer, for joining us here on this episode of Inside Story. As always, we welcome your comments, your suggestions or your emails. You can email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Bye-bye for now.